Now, when it comes to touchdowns in a single season, this is where Emmitt Smith does come back and shine. Has the top 3 spots, in fact. 1995, he had 25, and he broke the record he had just set in 1994 with 21. Welcome to Just the Stats NFL, the show that covers the NFL statistical leaders from the all-time greats to the current players leading the NFL. I'm Ernie Jennings, your host, and I'm back looking at another team from the NFC, specifically the NFC East. Today we're going to look at the third-place Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys finished the season with a record of 7 wins, 10 losses. At home, they were 2 wins and 7 losses. On the road, 5 wins, 3 losses. And in the division, 3 wins and 3 losses. So you can tell, unlike most teams, whether they're have a losing record or not, they tend to do better at home, whereas the Cowboys really did terrible at home. Winning record on the road, 5-3 on the road, but 2-7 at home. That is an area of... You would think it would be a strength playing in the Cowboys Stadium, but not last year. We'll see how they do in 2025. In fact, how do the Cowboy players of 2024 stand in relation to the greatest Cowboy players of all time and to the entire NFL as a whole? Well, that's what we're going to find out right now on this episode of Just the Stats NFL. So like always, we will start with the coaches. The greatest coach in Cowboys history is Tom Landry. He was coach from the beginning of the Cowboys from 1960 all the way to 1988. Had 250 wins with the Cowboys, which included 2 Super Bowls. That 250 wins is enough to put him 5th all-time in wins in the NFL. Andy Reid passed him a couple years ago, but he's 5th, still 5th. There's no one moving up the charts to catch him, so he'll be in that status for quite a while. And Mike McCarthy was the coach from 2020 to 2024, had 49 wins, actually had a decent winning percentage, 583, but only won 1 playoff game, could not make much farther than that. And so he was canned this past season, and now the offensive coordinator, Brian Schottenheimer, is the coach. So we'll see how he does, how he can revamp the offense, and just see what happens. No guarantees, though, that they'll be any better than they were before, but we'll see. All right, let's move on to the quarterbacks, the passing game. Career-wise, Tony Romo, who played from 2004 to 2016, is the all-time leader in passing yards with 34,183. Troy Aikman, second. He was the quarterback from 1989 to 2000. He had 32,943. And Dak Prescott, who's been the quarterback since 2016, has 31,434. So he only needs a little over 2,700 yards to become the all-time leading quarterback in Dallas Cowboys history as far as yards go, which I seriously think he'll get with no problem, barring injury. Obviously, that's always the key. So he should top the list after this year. We'll be watching that this upcoming season. So when we're looking at passing TDs all the time, Tony Romo again has 248 touchdowns for the Cowboys as a leading touchdown passes. Dak Prescott second with 213. He needs 35 to tie, 36 to pull into the lead. And again, this is a category where he could become the number 1 quarterback. I think it'll be a little harder than the yardage one. Getting 36 touchdown passes in a season is not that easy. But Dak Prescott has done that, so he could do it again. When it comes to interceptions all time, now Troy Aikman leads the team with 141 interceptions in his career with the Cowboys. Danny White, who was the quarterback from 1976 to 1988, had 132 to be in second. When it comes to Dak Prescott, he's sixth right now with 82. So it'll be a while. If he stays with the team, they seem to have a lot of turmoil when it comes contract time with him and so forth. So we'll see what happens, but I don't see him getting close to that record of Troy Aikman's 141 unless he finishes out his career in Dallas, but we'll see if that ever happens. When it comes to being sacked, Roger Staubach was sacked 313 times. He was a quarterback from 1969 to 1979, sacked 313 times. Troy Aikman was second with 259. Don Meredith, third with 257, and Dak Prescott, fourth with 256. So you can see only going to take 4 sacks this season, and Dak Prescott will move into second place ahead of Troy Aikman. So that will happen. He will get sacked 4 times, at least. Way more than that, obviously, in the season. But he won't catch Roger Staubach, at least not this year for overall. I mean, if he does, there's something wrong with the offensive line. So we'll just see what happens, but that'd be a lot of sacks, 47. You don't want to see a quarterback of his stature get sacked that many times. That's something you usually see, like the rookie, say like Caleb Williams. We'll talk about him when we look at the seasonal stats, who would get sacked that many times. But those are your top as far as sacks go. So when we're looking at the running backs, the all-time leader, not only for the Cowboys, but for the entire NFL, is Emmitt Smith. For the Cowboys from 1990 to 2002, he rushed for 17,162 yards. In his entire career, he rushed for 18,355 yards. So you can see only 1,200 yards or so was on another team. But with the Cowboys, definitely the big leader. Tony Dorsett's second, which on a lot of teams this would be first, but he's second with the Cowboys. Tony Dorsett from 1977 to 1987 had 12,036 yards to come in second with the team. Pretty good numbers. Not quite high enough. Needed to be over 13,000 to make the top 10, but still pretty excellent numbers. Ezekiel Elliott was third, who was with the team from 2016 to 2024. He had 8,488, but he has not been picked up by the team. He's been released, and he's a free agent at the moment. So I don't expect to see his numbers change, and they're not going to bring him back, I'm sure. But those are the top 3 as far as yards go. When it comes to touchdowns, this is where Emmitt Smith has a huge lead right now. Emmitt Smith, 153 touchdowns rushing. And again, this is a category where he's the NFL leader as well. He had 164 total touchdowns, 153 of them with the Cowboys. So you can see only 11 with the other team. Tony Dorsett second with 72, and Ezekiel Elliott just coming up short to move into second. He had 71. So there's nobody left currently except for Dak Prescott, who's 9th all-time on the list with 29. So he'll move up probably, but that really won't count. I mean, he's so far back. And they're bringing in some running backs this season, but they're not going to be permanent. They'll have to, sooner or later, the Cowboys will decide to pick up a serious running back. All right, that's the running backs. Let's look at the wide receivers and the all receivers, in fact. And when we look at those, it's a tight end, which is why I switched from wide receivers to receivers. But Jason Witten, 2003 to 2019, had 12,977 yards to top the Cowboys list as far as yards go. Michael Irvin, second, with 11,904 yards. And it's the same when it comes to receptions. Jason Witten, leads the team with 1,215. Michael Irvin second with 750. Those are your top two. And we're looking at those numbers, well, primarily Jason Witten's, as far as receptions go. Jason Witten is fourth all-time in the NFL with 1,228. So you can see, even though he went to another team, on that team he only had 13 receptions. So he had, obviously, 99% of his receptions were with the Cowboys. So he's fourth all-time in the NFL with receptions. And though he's fourth, he's still not the number one tight end. That's Tony Gonzalez, who had 1,325 receptions in his career. And Jerry Rice is number one all time with 1,549. So Jason Witten was a little over 300 behind, but still quite a career. When we're looking at current players, you have CeeDee Lamb's fourth right now with 496 receptions. So he'll definitely catch Dez Bryant, who has 531. So he only needs 35 to catch him. When we're looking at current players, you have CeeDee Lamb's fourth right now with 496 receptions. So he'll definitely catch Dez Bryant, who has 531. So he only needs 35 to catch him. So I don't see that as a problem for CeeDee Lamb. I'm sure he's most likely, the way I look at this team, going to have at least 100 receptions, barring injury. So CeeDee Lamb's right now fourth all time and should easily move to third. But after that, it'll be a couple more years on the team before he catches Michael Irvin. And I don't know if it's possible for him, actually. It might be if he can stay with the team long enough to catch Jason Witten. But as I mentioned before, these career records can be hard, barring quarterbacks. For a lot of the wide receivers, running backs, and even defensive players, it seems like a lot of teams aren't willing to give a third contract to a player, and they end up going somewhere else, which makes it difficult to have a career numbers for one team. In their whole career-wise, they could make a number, but for a team, it can be difficult. When it comes to yards, CeeDee Lamb's a little farther back. He's seventh in yards right now, but if he had a 1,000-yard season or 1,100 yards, he could move up into fifth, passing Bob Hayes and Dez Bryant. Now, when we're looking at TDs, this is close right now. Not so much with CeeDee Lamb. He's quite a ways back, but Dez Bryant from 2010 to 2017 had 73 touchdowns. Jason Witten from 2003 to 2019, so playing together for quite a long time, had 72. And then Bob Hayes, way back from 1965 to 1974, had 71. Those are your top three. CeeDee Lamb, the current player leading the list for the playing right now, has 38, so he's quite a ways back when it comes to the touchdown category. So closer with the receptions, farther with yards, and even farther when it comes to touchdowns. That's CeeDee Lamb. All right, let's look at the defense. When we're looking at the defense, we'll start with interceptions. Mel Renfro, from 1964 to 1977, had 52 interceptions to lead the team. So that's been the record since 1977. And when you look down the list, Trayvon Diggs is the closest. He has 20. So we're not expecting to see anything happen in that category. He's been on the team 4 years. Even if he goes another 4 years, that's 8, and sticks at the same pattern, he'd have 40. That would put him up into fourth. But you can see it's going to be a long ways. Mel Renfro had his 52 in 13 years. So, never know with Trayvon Diggs. And Deron Bland also, who's only been on the team since 2022, has 14 already. So those are the top two to watch. But it'll be a while before there's any approaching the higher numbers here in this category. When we're looking at tackles for loss, DeMarcus Ware dominates this list. From 2005 to 2013, he had 145 tackles for loss. Pretty impressive. In fact, so impressive that he's sixth all-time in tackles for loss. Counting the other team, he has 171 tackles for loss. So he, obviously, again, the majority of them with the Cowboys. But he's tied for sixth all-time as far as tackles for loss. Terrell Suggs with 202 tops the list. Second is DeMarcus Lawrence for the team. He has 97. He was moving up the list, but he's not on the team, so that isn't gonna. He's not gonna move ahead of DeMarcus Ware. We're looking at other. Micah Parsons, though, now is the current player. Has been on the team since 2021. Already in those short time period, has 63 tackles for loss. So he's definitely somebody that's on the move as far as that goes. So we'll see what happens with him. All right. Looking at sacks, the last category in the career stats. And again, DeMarcus Ware, but not so big of a lead this time. They had an impressive defense when you're looking at it. DeMarcus Ware from 2005 to 2013 had 117 sacks. Harvey Martin from 1973 to 1983 had 114. And this is what's impressive. And I'll go through the top four. Randy White, 1975 to 1988, had 111. And Too Tall Jones from 1974 to 1989 had 106. So you can see these three players overlapped. They were playing together for quite a bit of their career. You have three of those players having over 100 sacks. So you can imagine how great that defense was back in the day. I can't even imagine. You have three players of that magnitude, all with over 100 sacks. I can't remember a team that I went through so far that had four players that had 100 sacks in their career on the same team. And then they have four more with had over 90. So I can't remember any other team so far that I've seen that had that kind of sack total. So very impressive when it comes to the sacks. All right. Let's move on to single season records. And we'll start again with the quarterbacks. All right. Tony Romo tops the list as far as yards in a single season by 1 yard over Dak Prescott. Tony Romo in 2012 had 4,903 yards, which was one more than Dak Prescott had in 2012 when he had 4,902 yards. Tony Romo and Dak Prescott hold the top 7 spots as far as yards go. And they're the only two quarterbacks for the Cowboys to throw for more than 4,000 yards in a single season. So as I said earlier, Dak Prescott only needs, I think I said 2,700 yards. There's should be no reason he doesn't get that this season. Like I said, barring injury. So quite a impressive quarterback situation. When it comes to comparing that number, this past season, the top numbers in the past season with him, of course, Dak Prescott had a shortened season. He only played 8 games, so he only had 1,978 yards. So really it's not a season you can compare to the rest of the NFL, in fact. Joe Burrow led the NFL with 4,918 yards, which, by the way, is higher than the highest Cowboy by 15 yards. But so really Dak Prescott can't compare this past season because he only played 8 games. When we're looking at total touchdowns, so here's where Dak Prescott does pull in the lead. And again, I told you he needed 35 or 36 touchdowns this season to become number one. Well, in 2021, he threw for 37 touchdowns, and in 2023, he threw for 36. So it's very possible for him to set this record. this current season. So we'll see what happens, but he definitely has a chance when it comes to the touchdown category. Looking at interceptions now, this is different here. We have different players than just Dak Prescott and Tony Romo. Danny White, 1980, threw 25 interceptions. Now, he had 28 touchdowns. Still not a good ratio. It was a 5.7% interception rate. Eddie LeBaron in 1960, the first season for the Dallas Cowboys, also threw 25 touchdowns, but he threw an interception. I'm sorry, he had 25 interceptions. He only had 12 touchdowns, but he was throwing an interception at 11% rate. That's horrible. One of the highest rates I've seen, really. Obviously, he didn't maintain that quarterback status too long, but those are the worst interception leaders for the team. And when it comes to sacks, Don Meredith, good old Don Meredith, 1964, was sacked 58 times. Now, Dak Prescott in 2018 came close with 56. So those are your top two, only two to be sacked more than 50 times for the team. So Dak Prescott in 2018 was sacked 56 times. I was saying I didn't expect him to get sacked in the 40s this season, and I really don't. That 56 total was by far his highest. He had 39, though, 1 year, so which, by the way, was in 2023. So it's possible he could get up there, but I think they have a little bit better line than that. So we'll see what happens. All right, let's look at the running backs. The worst offensive area for the Cowboys when it comes to this past season, I'll say that. And here's an interesting thing. You would think Emmitt Smith, Tony Dorsett, somebody would be the number one player as far as yards in a single season, but no, it's actually DeMarco Murray in 2014 had 1,845 yards in a single season. Emmitt Smith is second, 1995. He had 1,773. Those are your top two. Now, when we're looking at this past season, as far as yards go, Rick O'Dowdle did have 1,079. Not bad, actually. And a fairly good yards per attempt, 4.6. So, but the Cowboys got rid of him, so we'll see what happens. He went to the Carolina Panthers, and Ezekiel Elliott, who was second with 226 yards, isn't on the team either. So they brought in some new players, and we'll just have to wait and see how these other players do. I'm not particularly confident, but we'll see how these new players do with Javonte Williams and Sanders. It really depends on Williams and how he's recovered from the injury, if there's really possibility for that. Now, when it comes to touchdowns in a single season, this is where Emmitt Smith does come back and shine. Has the top three spots, in fact. 1995, he had 25, and he broke the record he had just set in 1994 with 21. So, very impressive. 2 times with more than 20 touchdowns rushing. When you're looking at the all-time numbers, the 25 puts him at 4th all-time in the NFL as far as rushing touchdowns in a single season. LaDainian Tomlinson had 28 in 2006. That is the most ever. But with 25, he's 4th, and his 21 total, which he had in 1994, is good enough for 6th. So one of the few players, only Priest Holmes is on the list twice for running backs who had more than 20 or more touchdowns rushing in a single season. It's only happened 11 times, period. And Emmitt Smith has 2 of those. So that's your running backs. Now, when we're talking about And again, let me go back here. Rick O'Dowd on the running backs with 1,079 really wasn't too bad as far as that goes compared to the rest of the NFL. Obviously, though, I mean, Saquon Barkley had 2,005 yards. So that did lead the NFL. But with 1,079, Rick O'Dowd was tied for Tony Pollard for 12th in the NFL. Interesting that Tony Pollard had been with Dallas, and they got rid of him. And then they get Rick O'Dowd, who rushes for over 1,000 yards. They get rid of him too. So we'll see how they, who knows what they're thinking, honestly. Now, Rick O'Dowd, though, as far as touchdowns go, only had 2 touchdowns. And amazingly, Ezekiel Elliott led the team with 3, even though he only had 74 rushes. 3 of those were for touchdowns. And then you had 3 players, as far as touchdowns go, lead the league last season. Derrick Henry for Baltimore, Jahmyr Gibbs for Detroit, and James Cook for Buffalo all had 16 touchdowns. The Cowboys last season had 6 rushing touchdowns. Elliott had 3, Dowdle had 2, and Dak Prescott had 1. Wow. That's horrible, really. And honestly, it'll be curious to see how they do this year. All right. We will now move back like I was going to go, and we'll look at the receiving core this past season. CeeDee Lamb in 2023 set the record for most receptions in a single season for the Cowboys with 135, which is good enough for 6th all-time in the NFL. Michael Thomas in 2019 for the New Orleans Saints had 149. So 135 is very impressive. He came back this past season with 101, but he broke the record that Michael Irvin had set way back in 1995. So that record had been around for 28 years before it finally got broken. Jason Witten as a tight end is 3rd all-time with 110 receptions in a single season, which leads obviously the tight end category. I mean, Jason Witten has all the top spots when it comes to tight end position. So really, no one's competing with him. And that 110 is good enough as far as tight ends go to be 5th all-time in a single season. Interestingly, Zach Ertz has the most in 2018. He had 116 receptions as a tight end. That's the most in the NFL. So Jason Witten with 110 wasn't too far back. Now, when you're looking at this past season, CeeDee Lamb, as I said, had 101 receptions for the team, which is exceptional, really good. And in fact, good enough when we're comparing it to the whole NFL to be in the top 10. In fact, he was tied for 7th. There were 10 players in this past season that had 100 receptions or more, and CeeDee Lamb had 101. Jamar Chase led the NFL with 127. So really, CeeDee Lamb had a very impressive year. Now, Jake Ferguson as a tight end was 2nd in receptions with 59. And as far as running backs go, Rick O'Dowd had 39 receptions. So really, honestly, I'm not sure why they got rid of Rick O'Dowd. I mean, he didn't have a bad season. So to take a chance on a running back who was damaged goods there 2 years ago and came back last year, but didn't really play that well. And Miles Sanders, who has just not been impressive either. So we'll see what they expect to get out of this new crop of running backs. Now, when it comes to yards all time for the Cowboys, as far as receiving goes, this is CeeDee Lamb again. The same year he had 135 receptions. He had 1,749 yards to break the record that Michael Irvin had set in 1995 when he had 1,603 yards. Before CeeDee Lamb came along, Michael Irvin had the top 3 spots as far as the yards situation. And now you have CeeDee Lamb, who's going to definitely have a chance to, he could even break his own record. I mean, 1,749 is tough, but it's a possibility that he could do it. And in fact, 1,749 yards in a single season is ninth all time in the NFL. It's only happened 14 times that a wide receiver has received yards of more than 1,700, only 14 times in history. So that is quite an impressive number. Though I will say that one of those 14 times was just this past season when Jamar Chase had 1,708 yards to lead the NFL. Now, CeeDee Lamb this past season had 1,194 yards. Pretty good total. He was averaging 11.8 yards per reception. And that total, in fact, put him tied for 8th in the NFL this past season with that total. So pretty good year for CeeDee Lamb, considering that he was the only target. So he was covered every which way the defense could, but he still had a very good season. And he wasn't even playing with Prescott for most of the season, over half the season without Prescott. All right. When it comes to touchdowns, though, CeeDee Lamb had 6, but Jalen Tolbert had 7 this past season. And when you're comparing that to all time, well, it doesn't compare at all, really. I mean, the best season CeeDee Lamb has ever had was in 2023 when he had 12, but that's not close to the record. Dez Bryant in 2014 had 16 touchdowns receiving. Terrell Owens in 2007 had 15. Those are your top 2 numbers. When it comes to a running back, the flanker, in fact, in 1962, he has the 3rd spot with 14. So those are your top 3. As far as tight ends go, it's quite a ways down the list. Jason Witten is 22 on the list. In 2010, he had 9 touchdown receptions. So when it comes to the tight end category, even though they get a lot of receptions, a lot of yards, they weren't getting the touchdown passes often. All right. Now, when you're comparing the touchdowns with the entire NFL, again, receiving, Jamar Chase had 17, incredible amount. And with 7, Jalen Tolbert was quite a ways down the list. He was tied for 22nd. So category, and obviously when we already talked about, they had 6 rushing touchdowns. They really didn't even have that many passing touchdowns. So it was an off season. And again, when you don't have Dak Prescott, that's going to happen. All right. Now, when we're looking at interceptions in a single, well, then I'm sorry. What am I talking about? Never mind that. All right. That's the receivers. All right. Let's look at the defense. And we'll start with interceptions. Mel Renfro in 1969 had 10 interceptions to lead the team. That's the most ever by one player in a single season. Now, DaRon Bland, like I said, has been on the team just for 3 years. In 2023, he had 9. Quite an impressive number. When you're looking at he tied 2 other players who did it in the 80s, and Mel Renfro did it in 1969. So you're talking about him approaching a record that's been around for, 40 to 60 years almost. So really, really incredible player. We'll see how he does after that big year. He's got 14 total interceptions now. We'll just see what happens with him and how he does. But the Cowboys do have a pretty good defense, though this past year they had 4 players who had 2 interceptions. Trayvon Diggs was one of them. So we'll see what happens with that. Trayvon Diggs had 20 total interceptions so far this in his career with the team. So we'll see what he goes from there. Now, DaRon Bland, though he had that 9 in 2023, had 0 this past season. So I'm not going to speculate on what happened with that, but he doesn't have that many. And again, though, just as Deron Bland had 9 in 2023, this past season, as far as interceptions in the NFL go, let me bring that up. Every time I want to bring up the interception total, it likes to give me a hard time. But Kirby Joseph for Detroit had 9 interceptions. And Xavier McKinney for Green Bay had 8. Those were your top 2 players in the NFL when it comes to interceptions. Now, when we shift over to tackles for loss, as I was talking about DeMarcus Ware earlier, he's the all-time leader for the team. In fact, he had 27 tackles for loss in 2008. In 2011, he had 26. And in 2010, he had 21. 3 times with more than 20 tackles for loss. Micah Parsons is 4th. He had 20 in 2021. That's the best that Micah Parsons done so far. That's not bad in itself, but to have 27, and when you're looking at the all-time numbers, 27 would put him 6th all-time, and the 26th puts him at 7th all-time. Those 2 numbers are incredible. And in fact, when I say he was at 6th, 3 of the top numbers are by the same player, J.J. Watt. The record's 39. He's set in 2012, which is by far even better than his second best. J.J. Watt in 2014 and 2015 had 29. So DeMarcus Ware had 27, not far off of J.J. Watt numbers, but very good player. When we're looking at this past season, though, as I said, Micah Parsons in 2021 had 20 tackles for loss. This past season, he led the team with 12 tackles for loss. So not quite the same type of numbers, but 12 was what he had. Myles Garrett for Cleveland led the NFL with 22, the only player over 20. Trey Hendrickson had 19. And with 12, Micah Parsons quite a ways down this past season. Not the kind of numbers you want from somebody with the money they're paying him, but he was tied for 23rd in the NFL with 12 tackles for loss. So I'm sure they'd like to see a little bit of improvement on that. Now, the good thing with Micah Parsons is when we look at this last category is that he did have 12 sacks past season. So he had double digits in tackles for loss and sacks. So that's something you can hang your hat on, I guess. But when it comes to sacks all time with the team, Harvey Martin and DeMarcus Ware again had 20 sacks in a single season. Harvey Martin did it in 1977. DeMarcus Ware did it in 2008. And 20 sacks, when you're looking at it, and I've talked about this before, but on the unofficial list, which goes all the way back to 1960, 20 sacks puts him tied for 19th, DeMarcus Ware and Harvey Martin. Now, when you're looking at the official numbers, which began in 1982, that puts them at 12th. So it just depends on how you want to look at the numbers. I believe the unofficial numbers have been validated enough that they should count, and I think they will someday. But as I said, Micah Parsons had 12 this past season. And when you have 12 sacks, that's not bad, but it really comes short of what the NFL standard was. Again, Trey Hendrickson had 17 and a half. Myles Garrett had 14. Now, 12 puts him tied for 5th. Not bad, as far as the sack category goes. So he had a decent season, not compared to some of his other seasons, but still a good season. So that's your Dallas Cowboys. So what do we think as an outlook on the Cowboys for this upcoming season? For 2025, the odds makers have them positioned at 7.5 wins as a total. Can they get there? They had 7 this past season. Can they make it to 8 or higher? I think they can, though they finished 3rd in the division, and I think they'll actually finish 3rd again, despite maybe having more wins. And the reason is I just think the Eagles are too good and the Commanders are too good for Dallas to catch them. But I also do think they'll have more wins because, and this is based on a couple of things, but one, Dak Prescott has to play the entire season. I think if he does, and if he had in 2024, they might have had a couple more wins than what they had. But if he plays the entire season, and now he's got CeeDee Lamb and Pickens playing 2 wide receivers. So Lamb can't so easily be double covered all the time. And Ferguson's a good tight end. So their passing game could be great. I mean, Prescott 2 years ago had an awesome season. And then, of course, last season wasn't that great. But if he goes back to the numbers he had before this past season, they could really have quite an offensive passing game. What's going to bring him down is the running game. They have Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders as their top 2 running backs. They got Jaden Blue and Deuce Vaughn's. Deuce Vaughn's been around. It's not an impressive running game, and no one's going to respect it any more than they did last year. So that's going to hurt. Brian Schottenheimer, the new coach, offensive coordinator, moved up to the head coach. Can he put the pieces together? Can he do something different than what's been going on with the team? That's a unknown where he's going to come in and how well he's going to help out the team. So I'm still putting them at 3rd. I think they can get to 8 or 9 wins, but I don't really see them getting over 9. And I don't think they will make the playoffs this next season. So that's my stand on the Cowboys. Next up, we'll do the last place New York Giants. Take a look at them, and that will wrap up the NFC East. So stick around as I go through the NFC so you can hear about the greatest players from your favorite team. And if you want to hear about the AFC, check out my previous podcasts where I talk about every team in the AFC. Appreciate you listening. Please like this and subscribe. I'd appreciate that. You can contact me on Facebook, X, or Instagram at Just the Stats NFL if you have a question or comment or a correction. I don't mind that either. So as far as this episode goes, this is a wrap for Just the Stats NFL. Until next time, I am out.